Millionaire's black twins were blind until the new maid did something that changed everything. Two 7-year-old black girls sat in identical velvet chairs in a music room of the Harrison mansion, their hands folded in their laps as they listened to their private tutor drone through another lesson they couldn't see. Maya and Mia Harrison had been born blind, daughters of tech billionaire James Harrison and his late wife Sarah, and for 7 years they had lived in a world of expensive accommodations that felt more like golden cages than expressions of love. Today, like every day for the past 3 years since their mother's death, they would sit through lessons, eat meals prepared by chefs they'd never met, and go to bed in rooms filled with toys they couldn't fully enjoy, all while their father worked 18-hour days to avoid confronting the children who reminded him too painfully of the woman he'd lost. But today was different because today Maria Santos had started work as their housekeeper, and she was about to discover that these two little girls had been living in darkness that had nothing to do with their blindness. "Girls, can you tell me what 7 times 8 equals?" The tutor's voice was flat, professional, devoid of the warmth that children need to feel engaged with learning. Maya tilted her head slightly, her fingers tracing invisible numbers in the air as she calculated, while Mia sat perfectly still, having learned that movement often resulted in gentle but firm corrections about proper posture and sitting like young ladies. The tutor, Mrs. Patterson, had been hired because of her credentials with special needs education, but her approach treated the twins like problems to be solved rather than children to be nurtured. 56, Maya said quietly, and Mrs. Patterson made a note on her tablet without offering praise or encouragement. "Correct. Now, Mia, can you recite the state capitals we studied yesterday?" The routine was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway, not the measured clicks of staff members who had learned to move quietly through the house, but a different rhythm that somehow conveyed energy and purpose. Maria Santos paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. Two beautiful children sitting rigidly in chairs that seemed designed more for display than comfort, being questioned by a woman who never smiled or offered physical comfort, in a room that felt more like a museum than a place where children should be learning and growing. "Perdón," Maria said softly, her slight accent carrying warmth that hadn't been heard in this house for months. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm Maria, the new housekeeper." Maya's head turned toward the sound with the sharp attention that blind children develop, while Mia's posture relaxed slightly at hearing a voice that sounded genuinely kind rather than merely professional. Mrs. Patterson looked annoyed at the interruption. "We're in the middle of a lesson," she said crisply. "The children need to maintain their focus." But Maria had already noticed what the tutor seemed to miss, that Maya was fidgeting with what looked like boredom, while Mia appeared to be fighting back tears. In Maria's native Dominican Republic, she had raised 4 children of her own while working multiple jobs, and she recognized the signs of kids who needed connection more than they needed correction. "What are you learning about today?" Maria asked, addressing the twins directly rather than speaking about them to their tutor, as most adults did. The simple act of being spoken to rather than spoken about made both girls straighten with interest. "State capitals," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we've been sitting here for 2 hours." Mrs. Patterson shot Mia a disapproving look. "Mia, we don't complain about our lessons." Maria felt something twist in her chest at the way the child immediately shrank back, the way Maya instinctively reached for her sister's hand in a gesture of comfort that spoke of years of providing mutual support in a world that seemed designed to manage them rather than love them. 2 hours is a very long time to sit still," Maria said gently, her words carrying an implicit criticism of Mrs. Patterson's methods that the tutor clearly understood and didn't appreciate. "In my country, we believe children learn better when they can move and touch things, when learning feels like playing instead of work." Mrs. Patterson's response was swift and cutting. "Mrs. Santos, I appreciate your cultural perspective, but these children have special needs that require specialized approaches. Perhaps you should focus on your cleaning duties and leave education to the professionals." The dismissal was sharp, but Maria had faced down much worse than condescending tutors, And something in the way both twins had perked up at her words told her that these children were hungry for the kind of warmth and engagement they weren't receiving from their expensive education. Later that afternoon, Maria found the twins in the library, supposedly doing independent study, but actually sitting in silence, their braille books closed on the table beside them. Maya was running her fingers along the edge of her chair in a repetitive pattern that suggested anxiety, while Mia had her head down on her arms in a posture of defeat that seemed far too familiar for a 7-year-old to have mastered. "Are you two having a good day?" Maria asked as she began dusting the bookshelves, though her real focus was on the children who seemed to brighten at the sound of her voice. "Not really," Maya said with the honesty that children offer to adults they instinctively trust. "Mrs. Patterson says we're behind where we should be, that we need to work harder to keep up with normal children." Maria stopped dusting and turned to face them fully, her voice carrying indignation on their behalf. "Normal children? What does that even mean? Every child is different. Every child learns differently. There's nothing wrong with you that needs to be fixed." Mia lifted her head, and Maria could see tear tracks on her cheeks. "But we can't see," Mia said, as if this explained everything that was wrong with their world. "And Daddy doesn't like to be around us because we remind him of Mommy, and Mrs. Patterson says we're not progressing fast enough, and the music teacher quit because we couldn't read sheet music the regular way." The revelation hit Maria like a physical blow. These children weren't just dealing with blindness, they were dealing with abandonment, with a father who couldn't face his own grief long enough to provide the emotional support his daughters desperately needed. "Can I tell you something?" Maria said, pulling up a chair so she could sit at their eye level. "I have 4 children of my own, and each one of them is different. My oldest son, Carlos, was terrible at math, but could fix any broken toy just by listening to the sounds it made. My daughter, Isabella, couldn't sit still for 5 minutes, but could remember every story I ever told her. Being different isn't being broken. It's being special in your own way." Maya reached out tentatively until her hand found Maria's arm. "What else could your children do?" The question opened a floodgate of stories about Maria's children, about the ways they had each found to navigate a world that didn't always understand their strengths, about the creativity and resilience that children develop when they're encouraged to find their own paths instead of being forced into boxes that don't fit. As Maria talked, both twins moved closer, hungry for the kind of storytelling that Mrs. Patterson never provided, for the warmth and connection that had been missing from their lives since their mother's death. "I bet you two are good at lots of things that Mrs. Patterson doesn't even ask about," Maria continued. "What do you like to do when no one is making you study?" The question seemed to surprise them, as if their preferences had never been considered relevant to their daily routine. "I like to listen," Mia said slowly. "I can tell when people are happy or sad just by their voice, and I can hear birds outside that Maya can't hear." Maya nodded eagerly. "And I like to touch things and figure out how they work. I took apart my music box last week, and I think I know why it wasn't playing the right song anymore." Maria's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "Those are incredible abilities. Mia, you have emotional intelligence that some adults never develop. And Maya, you're an engineer. You understand how things work together to create something beautiful." The validation was clearly something neither child had heard before, and they seemed to grow taller in their chairs as Maria celebrated skills that their formal education had never recognized or nurtured. "Mrs. Patterson says those things don't matter for our real learning," Maya said, but her tone suggested she was beginning to question whether Mrs. Patterson might be wrong about some things. Maria's transformation of the twins' world began subtly, but accelerated rapidly as she discovered just how much potential was being wasted by an educational approach that focused on limitations rather than possibilities. The next morning, she arrived early and found them having breakfast in the formal dining room, eating cereal from expensive bowls while Mrs. Patterson read them news articles that were supposed to improve their current events knowledge. "Good morning, beautiful girls," Maria said with genuine warmth, and both children immediately smiled in a way that told Maria they had been looking forward to seeing her again. Mrs. Patterson looked up with barely concealed irritation. "Mrs. Santos, we're in the middle of breakfast and current events discussion. I've asked you before not to interrupt the children's educational time. But Maria had noticed something that Mrs. Patterson had missed. Maya was making faces at the taste of her cereal, while Mia was pushing hers around the bowl without eating much of it. What kind of cereal is that? Maria asked the girls. Some kind of healthy grain thing, Maya said with obvious distaste. Mrs. Patterson chose it because it has vitamins. Maria looked at the box and saw that it was indeed nutritious but probably tasted like cardboard, chosen for its health benefits rather than any consideration of whether children might actually want to eat it. You know what we used to have for breakfast when I was growing up? Maria asked, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's disapproving stare. Fresh fruit that we picked ourselves, and we made games out of guessing what kind of fruit it was just by smell and touch. The idea clearly intrigued both girls, who had been eating the same rotation of appropriate meals for months without anyone asking what they might actually enjoy. Could we try that sometime? Mia asked hopefully. Mrs. Patterson's response was swift and negative. The children are on a carefully planned nutritional program designed by their pediatric nutritionist. We can't just let them eat whatever they want. But Maria had seen the spark of interest in both girls' eyes, the first genuine enthusiasm they had shown about anything related to learning, and she wasn't going to let it be extinguished by rigid adherence to plans that treated children like projects rather than people. Learning about nutrition is part of education too, Maria said diplomatically. And if they're exploring food through touch and smell and taste, that's science education, isn't it? Mrs. Patterson clearly didn't appreciate having her authority questioned, especially by a housekeeper, but Maria's logic was sound and her suggestion reasonable. I suppose a brief exploration of different textures and flavors could be educational, Mrs. Patterson said reluctantly. Maya clapped her hands together with excitement. Can we do it now? Please. The enthusiasm in her voice was so genuine and eager that even Mrs. Patterson seemed to soften slightly, though she quickly reasserted control by stating that any food exploration would need to be carefully supervised and documented as part of their formal learning assessment. Maria spent the next hour turning the kitchen into a sensory learning laboratory, helping the twins identify fruits and vegetables by smell, texture, and taste while encouraging them to describe what they were experiencing in ways that built vocabulary and scientific observation skills simultaneously. This one feels smooth, but has little bumps, Maya said, running her fingers over an orange. And it smells like sunshine if sunshine had a smell. Mia laughed at her sister's description. I think it smells like Christmas morning when Mommy used to make pancakes with orange juice. The mention of their mother brought a moment of sadness, but it was the kind of healthy grief that comes from happy memories rather than the suppressed mourning that had been hanging over the house for years. The breakthrough came the following week when Maria discovered the twins' hidden musical talents, abilities that had been dismissed and discouraged by a series of instructors who couldn't adapt their teaching methods to accommodate blind students. She found Maya in the music room, sitting at the piano bench, but not playing, just running her fingers over the keys in silence. The piano sounds sad when nobody plays it, Maya said when she heard Maria's footsteps. Mrs. Patterson says I can't take piano lessons anymore because I can't read regular sheet music fast enough, and the special music teacher costs too much money. The casual mention of being denied something that clearly brought her joy because of cost considerations, in a house where money was essentially unlimited, made Maria's blood boil with protective anger. Who says you need to read music to play music? Maria asked, settling beside Maya on the piano bench. Some of the greatest musicians in the world never learned to read notes on paper. They played from their hearts, from what they heard and felt. Maya turned toward Maria with excitement. Really? Could I learn that way? Before Mrs. Patterson could appear to shut down another moment of enthusiasm, Maria placed Maya's right hand on the keys and showed her a simple melody, teaching by touch and sound rather than sight. Feel where your fingers are, Maria said softly. Music lives in your hands, in your heart, not on paper. Within minutes, Maya was picking out a simple tune, her face glowing with concentration and joy as she discovered that she could create beauty with her own hands. The sound attracted Mia, who appeared in the doorway with the quiet steps she had learned to use when she wasn't sure she was welcome. "Maya sounds happy," Mia observed, and Maria heard something wistful in her voice that suggested she was watching her sister experience something she wished she could share. "Do you like music too?" Maria asked. "I like to sing," Mia said shyly, "but Mrs. Patterson says I'm too quiet and I need to project my voice properly." Maria felt her heart breaking for these children whose natural talents were being systematically discouraged by adults who should have been nurturing their gifts. "Can you sing something for me?" she asked gently. "Just for me and Maya. Nice and soft like you like to do it." Mia's voice, when she finally began to sing, was pure and sweet and filled with an emotional depth that seemed impossible from someone so young. She sang a lullaby that their mother had sung to them, her voice carrying love and loss and hope in equal measure. Maya stopped playing piano to listen, and when the song ended, both sisters were crying, not from sadness, but from the joy of sharing something beautiful together. "That was perfect," Maria said, meaning every word. "You two are musicians, real musicians. Not because you can read music or perform for audiences, but because you understand that music is about feeling and sharing and connecting with other people." The validation seemed to unlock something in both girls, who began talking excitedly about songs they remembered, melodies they heard in their dreams, rhythms they felt in their hearts when they were happy or sad. Maria realized that these children had been living in silence, not because they couldn't see, but because no one had been listening to what they were trying to express. "Could we play music together sometimes?" Maya asked hopefully. "Just us, without Mrs. Patterson telling us we're doing it wrong." The request broke Maria's heart because it revealed how much criticism and correction these children had endured, how they had learned to associate learning with judgment rather than joy. "Every day," Maria promised, "we'll make music together every day, and we'll make it however feels right to you." Mia clapped her hands softly. "And we could sing the songs Mommy taught us." "All of them," Maria confirmed. "Every single one she would want you to remember." The transformation in Maya and Mia became impossible to ignore as they blossomed under Maria's nurturing approach to their education and development. Instead of sitting rigidly through formal lessons, they began each day with sensory explorations, touching different textures, identifying sounds, creating stories based on smells and tastes that engage their heightened senses in ways that traditional visual learning never could. Maria turned every household task into a learning opportunity. Folding laundry became a lesson in geometry and patterns. Cooking became chemistry and mathematics. Organizing supplies became exercises in categorization and logic. The twins thrived on this hands-on approach, their natural curiosity finally being nurtured rather than constrained by rigid academic structures. Mrs. Patterson, however, was not pleased with the changes she observed in her formerly compliant students. "The girls are becoming disruptive," she complained to Maria during one of their increasingly tense encounters. "They're questioning my methods, asking why they can't learn through touch and movement instead of sitting properly and focusing on approved materials. They're developing opinions about their education that are frankly inappropriate for children their age." Maria's response was measured but firm. "They're developing confidence and curiosity, which means they're learning to think for themselves. Isn't that what education is supposed to accomplish?" The tutor's face reddened with indignation. "Mrs. Santos, you may clean this house, but you are not qualified to have opinions about child development or educational philosophy." The confrontation escalated when Mrs. Patterson discovered Maya and Mia in the kitchen with Maria, learning fractions by measuring ingredients for cookies they were baking for the household staff. "This is completely inappropriate," Mrs. Patterson announced, her voice sharp with authority. "These children should be in the classroom working on their Braille literacy, not playing with food and making messes." Maya, who had gained confidence over the past weeks, looked up from a mixing bowl with flour on her hands and determination in her voice. "But we are learning, Mrs. Patterson. We're learning fractions and chemistry and how ingredients work together. And we're having fun while we do it." Mrs. Patterson's response revealed the fundamental difference between her approach and Maria's. "Learning is not supposed to be fun, Maya. Learning is supposed to be disciplined and rigorous. Fun is what you do after you've completed your real education. The statement hung in the air like a slap, and Maria felt her carefully maintained professional composure begin to crack. "With respect, Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice carrying steel beneath the politeness. "These children have been sitting in chairs being lectured at for years, and what do they have to show for it? They're afraid to ask questions, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to show enthusiasm about anything, because they've been taught that learning is something that happens to them rather than something they participate in." The argument was interrupted by Mia's small voice cutting through the tension. "I learned more with Maria in one morning than I learned with you in a whole month." The honesty of the statement, delivered without malice but with absolute certainty, was devastating in its simplicity. Mrs. Patterson stared at Mia in shock, clearly unused to having her methods questioned by the children she was supposed to be educating. "That's enough," she said firmly. "Girls, go to your room immediately. Mrs. Santos, I'll be speaking to Mr. Harrison about your inappropriate interference with these children's education." But as Mrs. Patterson stormed out, Maya reached for Maria's hand with complete trust. "You won't leave us, will you?" she asked. "Even if Mrs. Patterson tries to make Daddy send you away?" The showdown came sooner than expected when James Harrison returned from a business trip to find his household in upheaval. Mrs. Patterson demanding Maria's immediate dismissal, and his daughters more animated and talkative than he had seen them since their mother's death. The meeting in his home office felt like a court proceeding, with Mrs. Patterson presenting her case against Maria's unprofessional interference, while Maria stood quietly, knowing that her fate, and more importantly, the twins' futures, hung in the balance. "Mr. Harrison," Mrs. Patterson began, her voice filled with professional indignation. "I've worked with special needs children for 15 years, and I've never encountered such blatant disregard for established educational protocols. This woman has completely undermined my authority and filled the children's heads with unrealistic expectations about their capabilities." James looked tired, overwhelmed by the competing demands on his attention, and clearly uncomfortable with having to referee disputes about his daughter's care. "What exactly has Mrs. Santos done that's so problematic?" he asked wearily. Mrs. Patterson launched into a detailed complaint about unauthorized activities, inappropriate emotional involvement with the children, and encouraging behavior that was inconsistent with their limitations. As she spoke, James found himself thinking about the sounds he had heard coming from the kitchen and music room over the past weeks. Laughter, conversation, actual joy from children who had been silent and withdrawn for so long that he had almost forgotten they were capable of happiness. "And what do you have to say about these accusations?" James asked Maria, though his tone suggested he was going through the motions rather than genuinely seeking her perspective. Maria took a deep breath, knowing this might be her only chance to advocate for Maya and Mia. "Mr. Harrison, your daughters are brilliant, creative, talented children who have been treated like problems to be managed instead of people to be celebrated. They're not behind where they should be. They're ahead of most children their age in emotional intelligence, creativity, and problem-solving abilities. But they've been taught to hide their strengths and apologize for their differences instead of being encouraged to develop their unique talents." The conversation was interrupted by soft knocking on the office door, followed by Maya's voice calling, "Daddy, can we come in? We want to show you something." James's immediate instinct was to send them away. These adult conversations weren't appropriate for children, but something in his daughter's tone made him pause. "What do you want to show me?" he asked through the door. "Music." Mia's voice joined her sister's. "We made music together, and we want you to hear it because it sounds like how we feel about Maria, and we think maybe you should know how we feel." James opened the door to find his daughters standing hand in hand, both of them glowing with an excitement he hadn't seen since before Sarah's death. They had clearly been listening outside the door, understanding that Maria's future with their family was being decided, and they had come to offer their own testimony. "We know Mrs. Patterson says we're not learning the right way," Maya said, stepping forward with confidence that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. "But we are learning, Daddy. We're learning that we're good at things, that we can figure out problems, that we can make beautiful sounds, and solve math puzzles and understand how things work. Mia stepped forward to join her sister. Maria doesn't make us sit still and be quiet and pretend we're not sad about Mommy. She lets us talk about Mommy and sing the songs Mommy taught us. And she shows us how to do things instead of just telling us what we can't do. The twins' words carried such genuine emotion and clarity that even Mrs. Patterson seemed momentarily speechless. James looked at his daughters, really looked at them, and saw children who had been transformed from the withdrawn, silent figures they had become after Sarah's death into vibrant, confident, articulate young people who were advocating for themselves with remarkable eloquence. "Play me the music you made," James said finally, his voice rough with emotions he had been avoiding for 3 years. The twins led everyone to the music room, where Maya sat at the piano and began playing a simple but beautiful melody while Mia sang a song they had written about finding light in darkness, about people who help you discover what you're good at, about family being the people who see the best in you even when you can't see it yourself. The performance was far from perfect in technical terms, but it was filled with such genuine joy and love that it brought tears to James's eyes as he realized what he had been missing while he buried himself and worked to avoid facing his grief. When the music ended, James made a decision that changed everything. "Mrs. Patterson," he said quietly, "your services are no longer needed. Maria, I'd like to discuss expanding your role here to include educational coordination for the girls, working with tutors who understand that learning should build on strengths rather than focusing on limitations." Mrs. Patterson's face went white with shock and indignation. "Mr. Harrison, you're making a serious mistake. These children need professional educational support, not this." But James was looking at his daughters, who were glowing with pride and happiness, and he realized that what they needed most was what Maria had already given them. Someone who believed in their potential and encouraged them to believe in themselves. "Maria," Maya said, throwing her arms around the woman who had changed their world. "Does this mean you'll stay with us?" Maria hugged both girls tightly, her own eyes filled with tears of relief and joy. "As long as you want me here, Ms. Amores, we're going to learn so many wonderful things together." James watched this display of genuine affection between his daughters and their advocate, understanding for the first time since Sarah's death that love could create healing, that the right person could help his family find their way back to joy, and that sometimes the most important education happens when children feel safe enough to discover who they're meant to become. If this story moved you, maybe it's the sign you needed today. If it is, subscribe. The millionaire who had hidden from his daughters' needs behind expensive but inadequate solutions had discovered that the most valuable gift he could give them wasn't money or prestigious tutors, but someone who saw their potential and had the courage to nurture it, someone who understood that education should light fires rather than fill buckets, and that every child deserves to be celebrated for exactly who they are.